This talk is Alleyn Road, and the picture you see on the front of your screen is looking north from the far end by South Croxted Road. So the house on your left is 110, and you're looking there in 108, 106, 104, etc., etc. The talk is, I'm certainly going to talk about the road and the houses, but it's more about the people who lived in them. And the houses I select are really based on the kind of information I have, which have been various people have lent me or given me pictures of their ancestors, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. And also I'm grateful, which I thank them, and also grateful to Dulwich College, who've given me some of their archive sporting shots to lighten things up a bit. Anyway, here we go. So these are two Dulwich estate maps, 1860, the top one, 1876, and you can see that in 1860, while the road here, Alleyn Road, is drawn on the map, there's very little else. There are no properties at all on the road. Here is the Alleyn's Head pub. The Alleyn's Head dates from the 1840s, late 1840s. And the drawing here is put on later. That's the railway line, which is, of course, not here at that time. You've got the Paxton Hotel, unfortunately now closed. And you've got number 1 Alleyn Park, which is where the Paxton Green Surgery now is. Then if you look at 1876, you can see that a lot of the houses, this is Alleyn Park, a lot of the houses in Alleyn Park have been done. But in Alleyn Road, relatively few. There's this bunch here, some here, and some here. This is the Manor House is down here, which we'll talk about in a minute. And this is the first part of South Croxted Road, coming down to what is now Church Road. This is the Alleyn's Head and the cottages, albeit that picture's certainly taken in the 1920s. But this is quite an early picture, although this would have been the pub more in about the 1880s than the 1840s. It would have been probably a little bit smaller. At the other end of the road, we've got the Paxton Hotel. Again, this is taken about 1890, 1895. Just to give you an idea that before the houses were built, there were pubs, so you could go out drinking, no problem. Now, this is the Manor House, and the Manor House is here. And this is rough, and the Manor House, this is what is now Croxted Road. And obviously South Croxted Road, as we know, carries on, but the Manor House grounds effectively blocked it off. And this is a woodcut of the Manor House, dating from the 18th century. And this is a model of the Manor House made more recently, which we picked up we didn't buy it because it was quite expensive, but it was auctioned off, but somebody's actually made a model of it. But anyway, let's go on. This is Frederick Doulton. There were a lot of owners. I mean, the Manor House had been there quite some time, but we're really only going to deal with when it started, when it was bought for redevelopment. And this is Frederick Doulton of the Doulton family in Lambeth. And he acquired it in 1859. We took a lease in 1859. And the deal was he would spend £30,000 in 11 years on building houses along Alleyn Road and South Croxted Road. Unfortunately, he was an MP,
okay?
But even in those days, not all MPs were, some MPs were not as honest as others, and there were various problems he had, financial problems, fraud in Belgium, but he got away with it. Yeah, it didn't turn out. His initial development, while he lived in the house for a while, he built, in the 10 years he was there, he built 2 houses. And he died in 1872, and he's buried here in the Doulton Mausoleum in West Norwood Cemetery. This is the advertisement that he put in the newspaper to sell the site. I'm not going to ask you to read it, but just to give you an idea of the kind of thing he would have said. So here you go. They're selling, the only thing they've got is 2 decent houses. And they're here, Cressy House and Kenmure Villa, and we'll come on to them in a minute. So that's about all he'd done. There had been some other development, which we will see, because he sold sites to another builder. But basically, this is just the advertisement that appeared in the London City Press in 1869. Now, he sold it to a chap called Chinnery, whose claim to fame, look him up on Wikipedia. He was the Consul General, English Consul General in Liberia, and it was his actions over a particularly large and onerous loan for the Liberian government that caused a coup d'etat in that country. So he was persona non grata there and didn't spend an awful lot of time in Dulwich because he assigned the lease pretty rapidly. And then to a chap called Westwood, whose business was in irrigation canal companies. And he took the lease in about 1871 and stayed there till about 1875 when he moved out and the house was demolished. It's difficult these are various people who were involved over the time because it took quite some time for the road to be built out. This is a picture of John MacDonald Henderson, who was an accountant who was one of the CJ North was one of the early builders, but there are various other builders. And the final, probably most successful builder is a chap here called Edward van Vliet, who was a Dutchman, surprisingly. And you can, this DE Minute quote, you can see that Mr. Walter Cole, he's up here. He didn't have a great success, but he lived on Gypsy Hill and he became the owner of Westwood's Agreement in respect of the unbuilt land, 75 years unexpired. The original lease is for 84 years. And he's asking here exactly that. He says, you know, I'm coming to the thing 9 years on, and you expect me to sell houses with a much lesser lease than they were originally. So he asked the governors to start him again, if you like, for 84 years. And they're reasonably sympathetic to that. It's up for sale again. This is the 1884 prospectus. It talks about the land that was east of Mr. Westwood. To say Cole didn't do much, but Edward van Vliet, this well-known and an owner of first-class houses in and about the neighbourhood of Norwood, having built 300 in the vicinity, all of which, the most important thing, let rapidly. Of course, in those days, most houses were let. And this is the share offering of the Dulwich, I can't quite see it, of the company to redevelop, but you're talking, by the standards of the period, 1880s, quite large sums of money. You know, £115,000 today, that will be millions. And you know, they talk about how it's all been checked out by this individual surveyor and estate agent. This just shows you this little extract again from newspapers about shows you work that was still going on before the thing was sold on the Manor House estate. That a couple of people were shifting muck, which they shouldn't do, stealing and moving it around the corner. So work was still ongoing. This chap, Charles James Rymel, was obviously working on it, but we really have to wait for Van Vliet and co. to get involved to see how much the work properly start. So Van Vliet, you know, a man of some means and good character, having carried out a large building. If you go to Laurie Park Avenue in Sydenham, you can see a lot of his houses there. He actually lived in South Norwood, and there's quite a few down there. So he was a pretty successful builder by the standards of the day. So let's look. We're going now back to the 1876 map, and we're going to look at these houses here, which are some of the first ones. And here they are. They were on leases 84 years from Lady Day 1859 at a ground rent of £4 1 and 4p. And here they are, the 6 houses. Oakley Villa, going from that way, which is now number 86, Burnley Lodge, Lowood, Cressy Villa, and Kenmure Villa, which are mentioned in the earlier sales particulars, and Acacia Villa. So you can see in more detail, all the Alleyn Park has been finished. These houses here have been finished, and their gardens back onto Alleyn Road. Not like that now, of course, because these have all been redeveloped, but after the First World War. So this is the oldest house in the street. This is number 92. It's called Cressy Villa, later changed to Oakdean. And interestingly, or not interestingly, only recently has it been, the roof has been changed. Somebody has put an extra story in the roof. And if you go along there now, you'll see a much higher roof. But this is the oldest remaining house in the street, Cressy Villa. Here's the advertisement in 1869, left of £50 a annum, 84 years from 1859. It was sold for £689. I bet the current owner didn't pay £689. And the first lessee was Frederick Doulton. So this was a house, although he developed it, it was built by the builder, the CJ, whatever he was called. So here are the occupants. So the first it was sort of available 1869. So the first occupant is this HM Customs clerk, which you'd think perhaps there was, you wouldn't have thought he could have afforded a house like this, but perhaps there were backhanders and things in the customs thing to enable him to do it. But he was there for quite some time before he moved to Rosendale Road. And then we have Arthur H. Goodall, which we'll come on to in a minute. He changed the name, the house, to Oak Dean. He was a photographer, and he was an old Dulwich hand. He lived in Dulwich, but we'll see him later. And then Frederick Henry Sneed, who was a boot manufacturer, and he was there for 25 years, and in fact tried to release. And you can see, you know, his age as he gets on. The ages change because of the census dates. Anyway, that's rather interesting wife's name, Apra Rosa Augusta. So this is Arthur Hammond, we were just talking about earlier. He lived at Rydell Cottage in Elms Road as a boy, and his brother Thomas Goodall, who was listed in the 1891 census, was quite a well-known artist in Suffolk, and this is a typical one of his paintings. And this is not the house. This is number 86, but it's a similar house. That's the only original, and you can see the original design of the Dulwich Estate gate and the fences and the hedges. No drives or anything in those days because, of course, no cars, no carriages. If they wanted to hire a carriage, they would have hired it from Tillings, the job master, who had a stables up near the Paxton Hotel. Looking at number 94, similar. This is again, another advertisement. And it gives us a little bit of ideas of what the rooms are, what it has: 4 reception rooms, entrance hall, 7 bed and dressing rooms, 2 water closets. Now that's pretty good by the standards of the day, because normally it was just 1. Cellarage and a fantastic garden, and all let for £84 a year. And it says Dulwich College, introduce, all that. And then it tells you again, this one sold for 660, so this is slightly cheaper. And the purchaser was a naval captain, Lieutenant Commander Benjamin Renault, Englishman. I've not been able to find a picture of him, but he was well known. He was a pretty active guy in the Navy. He worked in Jamaica. He did quite a lot of Jamaica, and he produced this fantastic booklet of paintings of all the various ports he'd been in, and this is just a little extract. So he'd been in the East Africa, he'd been all over the place. He'd been in the Baltic and wherever Hango Island is, and his claim to fame, if you like, was the first shot fired at the Russians in the Crimean War in 1854. So quite a character. While we're on sort of forces, I'm going to touch briefly Alleyn Road suffered quite badly in the First World War. The number of people who lived here or had lived here died in the war. This was just one, Lieutenant Bender, who actually lived at 94 Alleyn Road. These are all the others. And we're going to look at just a few of them. Lieutenant Wakely, Spurgis, a chaplain, another Lance Corporal, so they weren't all officers. This chap here who lived in Alleyn Crescent actually got the VC. So he was awarded the VC. Yeah. Despite, you know, these were incredibly brave guys, no question about it. But again, posthumously awarded the VC. And these are all also college boys. This is where I get the information from, Dulwich College boys. And on a lighter tone, this is an Austin 7. And there's a quote here from 1931 where the owner wants to build a garage for his little car because he wants to take his boys to school when the weather isn't very good, when there's bad weather. You think of what parents do for their children today. But there's only 5'4" between the house and the fence. I think they did allow him to build a garage, an asbestos garage in the back garden, in the end. But let's move now to the next set of houses, and that's Alleyn Crescent. Now you'll know Alleyn Crescent is now 1960s townhouses, and there's this green space in the front that you will know because there's the pub, the later edition of the Alleyn's Head. And here on the early maps, you can see where the green is. And you can see that the original intention was to have Alleyn Crescent going all the way through and to build a series of houses all the way like that. They only got to 4 in the end. So there's the Alleyn's Head again, the old Alleyn's Head as opposed to the new one. And they were built and sold as C.J. North was the builder, who also built the other ones further along the road. And he sold them to a chap called Hayter Scrivener, who was a corn and coal factor up in Southwark. And there's this quite pleasant little minute note saying that Scrivener has been paying for the upkeep of this grass in front of it, even though he wasn't supposed to. He'd been doing it anyway. And that, yeah, considerable outlay, but that he was happy to continue. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of the houses, but I do have a picture of 2 of the boys who lived there in the Dulwich College First 15 rugby team in the 1870s. And here they are, Joseph Henderson and Frederick C.B. Butler. But look at the fantastic outfits with their little hats on and the stripes, all taken. And again, Dulwich College has all these photographs of all the sports teams. And that was him in the cricket team when he was Hutchinson. Here he is in the 1878-1879 cricket team, taken on the sports fields. And also they have a picture of Butler playing in one of the school plays in 1875. And he's this chap here in Sheridan's The Rivals. So he's Sir Anthony Absolute. And I think it's fantastic that you can see it. You know, it's 150 years ago that this was done. Now, the other house, number 4, was a bit of a cultural centre in Dulwich because not only did Arnold Dolmetsch here, a German who came to England and was first employed as a music teacher in the college, but his particular interest, as many of you will know, was playing old music on the original instrument, or if you like, historic music on historic instruments rather than, so it's in playing 17th century music on 17th century style musical instruments. And he lived in various houses in Dulwich for quite some time, and was really quite well known. Not so well known are these 2 Scottish artists, Tristram James Ellis, who mainly painted Middle East scenes, and a Scottish artist here, William Cotton Fyde, who mainly painted scenes in Scotland, not unreasonably. But it's interesting that first you have a musician, then 2 artists. Whether there was any connection between them, I don't know. So now we're going to look at these houses here, 12 to 14 Alleyn Road, one of which is still standing, and that's number 12. Now, how original it is, I mean, a lot of work was done about 20 years ago on the house, so I don't know how original that is. Here it is here. It looks as all sorts of different bits have been added on, but it may have been like that originally. This bit here is new in the garden. But the first reference we come to it is 1873, when we have an advertisement for someone buying a bath chair. And we know that the resident, the owner or the tenant then was a chap called George Grant, and we assume that it was him who was trying to buy a second-hand bath chair. And here it is for sale. Shortly after 1873, it's Grant, and in 1878, it's for sale. It doesn't tell us how much, but it contains 3 receptions, 7 bedrooms, bathrooms, and Dulwich College privileges, which of course meant that if you had a son no matter how thick he was, if you were a tenant and to the estate, they could go to Dulwich College. One of the later owners was at the time, a very well-known jockey called Charlie Trigg. He won the 1910 Epsom Oaks on Rosedrop. Here's a picture of him doing it. Yeah, he was a really successful jockey, 840 winners. He rode the inaugural, won the first race at Newbury Racecourse, and spent some time, fun enough, before the First World War, racing in Austria. He was a very successful racer over there. But more to the point, we get he and his wife were, after the first, when he came back before the First War, she was, here she is in her army uniform. She was there. They were pretty wealthy and they had a car. And here you've got her being summoned for driving 20 miles an hour and being fined £7.10. But during the war she met somebody else, and this Captain Pierce Walter Kippax, and divorce. Divorce was, I mean, we always say now that divorce didn't happen. It's more common than you think in those days. Just people, I don't think, talked about it. And you have here the servant saying, the correspondent, Mr. Kippax, used to visit the house when the petitioner was not at home, the petitioner being Charlie Trigg. When the captain was there, the front doors used to be locked, the windows in the dining room left open so that the captain would be able to get away. I rather like that image of, so if Charlie comes and knocks on the door, the captain leaps out the back and the open dining room window. Anyway. And there's another also in the house. After the Triggs, the house was bought by a German, Alfred Heinrich Jungermann. A lot of Germans in Dulwich generally, and he made typewriter ribbons before the First World War. We laugh now. We think now that, you know, German cars, BMW, Mercedes, taken over. But before the First World War, a lot of the technology, things like ink ribbons and telephones, all came from Germany. All the technology was German. And obviously in the First World War that was a slight problem. But Jungermann had an English wife and his sons went to Dulwich College, and he did in the end get naturalized. But he got caught out because in the First World War, he was regarded as an alien. So he had, even though he had a business, a large business in London, he had to get permission to go, and he was buying materials for his factory. As you say, his erstwhile suppliers in Germany being no longer available. And he made the mistake of spending a couple of days with his father-in-law, which was 2 days more than he had a license for, and he was arrested. But he was obviously it was a pretty good business, because Norman Burkitt, KC, who defended him, although he lost, was a pretty well-known KC and became quite a very well-known barrister and English judge at the Nuremberg trials later. So Jungermann was guilty, fined £100. And now we're moving next door to number 14, leased to a chap called Fox, William Fox. He paid £20 a year. And this talks about this South London Press, don't read it too much, it's just 1877 there's a fire in the house, and they called the Crystal Palace fire station, which is up here near the Crystal Palace, we can just see behind it. And a steam pump from Brixton and Manor. So it must have been quite a far, but it's just interesting to see that's how they would. This was before the Dulwich fire station was opened. The Dulwich fire station doesn't come until the 1890s, the one in Court Lane. So it says here, the building is fortunately insured in the Phoenix Fire Office, so it was rebuilt. And one of them, the other later occupants, of course, is Lorraine Wilson, who's very well known, as I've said here, Dulwich worthy accountant, the founder of Dulwich Hamlet Football Club. And here you've got, this is the plaque that you see in their current ground. Yeah, but you can read about him in our magazine, about what he did to progress football in Dulwich. And then one of the later occupants was Henry Hoyland, the artist. And in fact, I think he died there. He'd lived before at Pond Cottages and been away in the war, and he died there in the late 1947. So just next door, 16 Alleyn Road, called Norfolk Lodge, later Pencliffe. And here's the lease going out. And another sale in 1881. And one of the early occupants, a chap called George Cooper. And that was another business in Dulwich that you see quite a lot of. Railway engineer, often in Argentina, spelt it wrongly. But these, he worked on the Buenos Aires, badly spelled, Great Southern Railway in 1870. And there it's up for sale again. This is in 1914. Coleman William Fox. So he owned 12, 14, and 16. But yeah, railway engineering was a big job in the early part of the century, and a lot of them lived here. So we're now back into the 1886 map, and we've seen the houses here, and we're going to deal with the houses up the end of the road. Still nothing much happening. South Croxted Road, they're starting to come down. And the church is there. We'll talk about that in a minute. So here's a shot taken from South Croxted Road as it was. This is Alleyn Road. That's number 110. This is a bus, I think probably 1895, 1900. You can see that the road has been curbed, but not tarmacked. That's a view we saw earlier, looking down again. The road has been curbed. So this is probably a little bit later, 1905, 1910, but the road hasn't been finished. And this is, the roads, initially the road was just a mud track, and the pavement, there were no curbing. And you can see here various notes about the vestry didn't want to take over the road because there weren't enough people to pay to have the road done up, to pay by frontage. The surveyor, the college surveyor, gave put various projects forward for £660 with the names of the occupiers and their frontages to pay. These are 1880s. These are the slightly smaller semis in the 1880s. This is the one interesting one. This is the only double house you can see here. Not only they were built back to back, and I think this was Mr. Cole, who we saw earlier. He didn't do very well. The view we just saw was that, looking up here. So you got the double. This was the only one which also had an access off South Croxted Road. None of them do now, although of course a lot of the houses have garages and garden buildings and what have you. So this is the advertisement. Yes, Twain House, or Twain Villa, it was called. Yeah, Twain Lodge and Carlton Lodge. That's slightly unusual. £80 an annum. So we now look at 1886, which we were looking at earlier, and that's what we're just looking at. And here we are in 1906, and the whole road has pretty well been done. Everything has been done, even down here, which we'll come to in a minute. So we're just going to have a quick random look at some of these houses. This one's just interesting because of the number of advertisements Mrs. Robb put in for servants. They didn't last, shall I say, because you got one 1899, 1900. She was always advertising for good servants. Here's the house today. Number 8, that's 8 as it is today. And this is postcard we have with the gates. And this was occupied by the assistant director of works of the Admiralty. And in fact, he became Sir Thomas Sims, CB, when he was promoted director of works. And there's the old gas light outside. But that's quite unusual. Most of them only had little wooden gates. So perhaps by then he had got a car or a carriage or, something to go in. This is number 8, 8 Alleyn Road again. This is, that's been demolished now, but one of the occupants was an architect called Chambers, who built the cathedral in Bombay. And this was a later one. In fact, this chap still, Edmund Nicholas Young, is still directing. But there was a report in the Coventry Evening Telegraph, how as a young man, he'd got on a theatre directing course, and he obviously was successful. He's still going. This is 20 and 22. This is Sam Silkin, MP for Dulwich, 64 to 83. He lived at 22. And this is not the Reverend J. Fleming and the bell here. It's about who actually owned the house. People rented them. They were bought as buy-to-lets. And the people who owned this house was Robert Warner, who's the bell foundry, who made the bell of Big Ben, is what that is, and the Reverend J. Fleming, pictured here, who was a wealthy vicar at Ebury Square. So the houses were actually owned by these, the long-term lease was owned by the estate, but they owned the 84-year lease, and they then let the house out to various other people. So buy-to-let, nothing new. And here's one of the houses for sale. You'll cry over the price, £1,100. This is probably 1910. I got a brochure of these. And again, what it tells you, talks about the convenience to the railway line. You know, gives you a bit of description, how it's well planned, the bedrooms, spacious entrance hall, nice garden. All the things pretty much the same as you would see today. That's Martin and Carnaby who were doing that. And this is an advertisement. I mean, people moving to Dulwich to send their children to the foundation school, again, is nothing new. And there's two adverts here from this chap, William Thomas Martin, who's retired Indian civil servant who sent his sons to the college. And once they were finished, he sold off all his furniture and the house in the end. And he called it Mirzapur, because he came from what Mirzapur is in India, I don't know, but... And you see the furniture supplied by Maple and Company. It's just an interesting list of Hazelwood bedroom suites, all these things, rosewood drawing rooms. Everybody had a piano by Becksteiner, so an expensive piano in this case. Wilton pile carpets, expensive curtains. Yeah, I mean, these retired Indian civil servants had done all right. This is 44, Coimbra, and this is another engineer, but he was a rail, mining and harbour engineer, and this is one of the harbours that he built. And this note here is a later one about somebody who wanted permission to sublet. The estate were very hot on subletting when they found out. Mostly they didn't, but this guy has been found out. He goes and says, come on, be reasonable, chaps. The answer was no. The estate would not allow, because the original leases did not allow you to sublet. This is 46 Alleyn Road, and this is Walter Dowson, who was a chemist with the Borough's Welcome. This is Brockwell Hall, and this is the Brockwell Hall grounds when what we now think of as Brockwell Hall in Brockwell Park as a rather nice park was in fact a factory. It was a chemical works where they made Borough's Welcome made drugs. And these two houses here, this is 52 and 54, occupied by a diamond merchant, Walter Heckrath, and I put him on basic because I think that is just a fantastic moustache. He came from South Africa. He'd done most of his work in South Africa and became a diamond merchant in Hatton Garden later in life. And you can see here the things being for sale, the rent, 85 or 90 pounds for these two houses, 52. And this is his son who was killed in the First War. He didn't go to the college, but they think he was in Australia. But no, he did go to the college. And here he is sitting in yes, there he is, Cyril Heckrath, 1900. It's a rather sad picture in a way. You think so many people were killed in the First World War, but it's a good one. Moving next door, a lot of stuff, 54. Originally called Villa Belgica, because the first occupier was a Belgian, who was the Belgian State Railways representative. But the next occupier was this chap here, Alfred Edward Eames, who was the controller of the telegraph office, the GPO. And here he is sitting outside with his family. He's a grandfather by now, sitting out with his wife, his various children and their wives, and his various grandchildren. There's a shot of his wife and his aunt in the front of the house. And here are some of his sons, grandsons. But more interesting is, pick these pictures here. He was awarded the Imperial Service Order, which you got really for long service in government. If you work for the government, as he did, as a post office, telegraph office and the post office. He got this award on retirement, and you had to, and this was the order which you worked out. Here he is with his sword. So this was the fancy order that went with the Imperial Service Order. He worked up from nothing. He was born his father was a sergeant in the army. So he worked his way up. He did pretty well. Died at 78. In 1910 when he was awarded the order. And here is the furniture cell. You can't really see the detail, but you could, and this is marked up. This was provided by his great grandson, great grandson, and the various prices that they wrote against the rosewood ornamental sideboards, £3, 5 shillings. The upright piano, you got 14 shillings for it, £14 for it. But it's the kind of detail that we like to get on the, and then just pop along the road to 74 Alleyn Road, which is Lieutenant Colonel William Temple VC, who got his VC in New Zealand. He was an army medic. A lot of them retired here, and he retired. And you've got Dr. Peter Peterson here, Professor of Sanskrit. Again, when he wasn't in India, he lived here in Dulwich. A lot of Indian connections, people in Dulwich. Whether it's they coming back to do their children, or they retired here, or they born here and went out there. Here's the church. Here's Emmanuel Church. Some of you may remember it before it got burnt down. This is the Clive Road view. So this is the church, and that's why the road is called Church Parade. This is a shot taken about 1900 in South Croxted Road, looking back towards the backs of the houses in Alleyn Road. You can see here 52, 54 there. Here is Church Parade, or Church Road as it is now. You can see the Crystal Palace towering over everything, the water towers and the palace itself. And yes, so they did Alleyn Road first, then they worked their way down and then completed South Croxted Road. But you can see it's hardly made up at all. Now we're going to the other end of Alleyn Road, if you like, the northern end looking south. Again, you can just see the Crystal Palace over the top. Here are the gates of number 8, but we're actually going to look at these houses here. This is number 1. And this is another thing about Dulwich, is a lot of the houses were occupied by meat butchers and fish salesmen, mainly from the Smithfield market. In fact, this chap here had moved from 34 Croxted Road, big house in Croxted Road, which is where the council flats are now. But they went obviously from West Dulwich. They would have commuted in from West Dulwich. But in those days, the trains ran all night. So these chaps could get up to the market very early. It was good for, as I say, butchers and fishmongers because they went in early, and it was good for journalists because they came back late. And that was why this was built. There's the original house, and here's the extension for the garage and the billiard room built just afterwards in 1908. This is number 3. It's one of the early occupiers, Anne Lockie Vaux. The interesting thing again is she was a divorcee, moving from the northeast. I mean, it seems very strange, although she was probably fairly wealthy because she was a member of a brewery family in the northeast and divorced her husband for acts of cruelty. He was a farmer, and yes, they retired. I mean, a lot of people did retire to Dulwich, and we think it's because of the Crystal Palace. What a great place to retire. And you've got a nice house, and you've got all the entertainment up the road. Here it is for sale. She paid £1,200. 5 excellent bed chambers, one bathroom with bath, lavatory basin, and hot and cold as well. When you think that we all today insist on en suites pretty well everywhere, they survived with 5 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. But everything else, wine cellar, well-lighted kitchen, scullery, coal cellar, everything that you could want, but £1,200. This is number 9. The house itself is not interesting. It's the chap who lived here, Walter Hogan. He lived here while these houses were built about 1898, and he lived here in 1899, 1900, while he was building what you now know as Ducks, but which was originally Cumley Bank. And before the First World War, the most expensive house built in Dulwich cost £6,000. His father He was very wealthy, although when you look at his census returns, he says bank clerk. The reality was quite the opposite. His father was the MD of John Rylands and Sons, who was the largest clothing manufacturer in the UK in the latter part of the 19th century. So money wasn't a problem. This is their works. John Rylands is currently on the Victorian Society's buildings at risk. I think looking at it is at risk. It's in Wigan. In Wigan, that's where they made their stuff. And here's one of his sons over here. Again, the cricket team slightly later. So they were, yeah, interesting. And then we move on a bit to number 11, where the occupier was a chap called Arthur Davies, who came from Wales, who was a draper with a shop at 33-37 Wilton Road by Victoria Station. He's quite well known, but not so well known as his son, who was a very well-known judge, educated at Dulwich College. Yeah, you can, one of their alumni, as they say. He's a member of the Privy Council. Yeah, he was quite well known. And this chap here, Bunning, or Binning, Manley and James, again, another German thing. Before the First World War, aspirin was supplied by Germany, a German monopoly. And again, 1914, what the heck do you do? So Manley and James are the first aspirin manufacturers in the country. Branches all over the place. And this is the factory that they built shortly afterwards in Cold Harbour Lane. So you get all these sort of interesting little tidbits of, usually that was your standard. This is a standard Dulwich Estate post with the gate. And they're still, I think they all have in and out drives even today. This is another one. This lady here, Elizabeth Spurrier, she retired here because her husband died in 1899. She didn't live here long, but they ran pubs, big pubs, one in Deal and one in Chatham. So again, you know, she must have sold up and moved here. Crystal Palace, just round the corner. And we're going to finish off just looking briefly at the later developments. You can see here the coloured. As the leases ran out in Alleyn Park, the estate bought them back and sold them off to developers, and they started to build houses here in Alleyn Road on the other side, on the east side, whereas before you got only on the west side. So here I'm looking at these houses here. That's the oldest house in Alleyn Park over there. But anyway, just these ones here. You've got these two houses here, 35 and 79. That's 35 and that's, I think, 79. Interesting because 79 was built by G.A. Dean, the local builder, for Honourable J.H. Thomas MP, who wasn't a local MP, but who lived locally. And he was quite a well-known character. He lived in this house, 125 Thurlow Park Road, what is now Oakfield School. And here he is. If you go online and you type in Honourable J.H. Thomas YouTube, you get a film of him standing at the front door and walking around his garden. Unfortunately not talking, and here's a little clip of it. He was a very good friend with George V and Queen Mary. And the apocryphal story is that when George V was recovering from an appendectomy, an operation, he came round to talk to him, and he told so many jokes that George V laughed so much that he opened up his cut, as it were, where they'd cut to get it out. But yeah, there they are, and he built. So the house itself had been given to him. He's a trade unionist originally of the National Railway Union, and this house had been given. I don't think there's many trade union leaders who get that today. But anyway, it's still there, still fun. And we're going to look at here's 79 again, because we're going to look at somebody else. That's an original drawing. And I have here another one of the more later owners, a chap called Gilbert Ponsford Fisher. Those who knew John Major, the former Dulwich Estate head, I think he looks pretty much like him. But in fact, he was a bank manager of the London County and Westminster Bank in St James Square. And I know his granddaughter very well, and she describes him as he was a pretty tough character, pretty hard on everybody. And this is how he progressed through Dulwich. He started in 81 Turney Road, then moved to Court Lane Gardens, then moved to Alleyn Park, and ended up here in Alleyn Road. His wife had died while they were in Alleyn Park, and he lived in this, it's not a huge house, with a cook who changed her uniform, apparently, from morning to evening, who wore a different outfit in the evening, two maids and two gardeners. They knew how to look after themselves in those days, but and then next door, we've got here, I've got the original drawings here of this house, and here's the house as it is today. And you just see the gable, and it's still the garage, still, yeah, and the cat slide roof. And Llewellyn Horseman was an architect who did quite a lot of work here, although he lived in Sutton. So we can track it back. And then you hear again, this is 89 Alleyn Road. The house is at the end. It sort of looks like that. It's a semi-detached. There's one house in Alleyn Road, one house in Alleyn Park. Here are the plans. Here's the slightly optimistically named Great Britain Property Investment Corporation Limited. That was the original design, but none of this, it says here, none of the churches like Neo Geo. And they decided to do it like this. Here are the floor plans. They're not actually that big houses, although one has been extended recently. And as we come to the end, I'm going to finish off with, not strictly in Alleyn Road, but because this is South Croxted Road, this is the old tram stop, which comes from the late 50s and was actually built partly in the garden of the house we just saw, 89 Alleyn Road, and it's opposite in Alleyn Park. Sorry, Alleyn Road. Yeah, in the back garden there. So 110 Alleyn Road.